Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Friday, December 5th, 2025. It's the end of the week, the end of the day, our favorite time, our favorite show here at Judging Freedom, the Intelligence Community Roundtable, with my dear friends and collaborators doing, as always, their double duty. Larry Johnson and Ray McGovern. Larry, Ray, welcome here. Thank you for accommodating my schedule. I thought we would start with the hot news of the week. I was surprised at all the publicity that my comments got characterizing the Secretary of Defense as a war criminal. But I would argue that the killing of these two survivors, as horrific as that was, can't be used to divert scrutiny to the entire program, which is unconstitutional and criminal. Ray?
That's exactly right. There was a teacher at Cardozo Law School who points that out. This is the danger, and it might be even intentional. The first strike was illegal, an act of war, for God's sake, and everybody who has a modicum of knowledge of the rules of war, or the need for evidence before you use lethal force, knows that. So, whether Hegseth gets away with this or not depends on whether Congress can grow a couple or grow a backbone. And I'm tired of predicting that. Hegseth is clearly a war criminal, and I think anybody who knows anything about it would affirm that. And I'm glad you said I had missed that. I'm glad you said it, Judge.
Larry, in my opinion, Admiral Bradley should have been marched out of the Capitol building in handcuffs and shackles and taken right to the nearest military prison. You are a veteran of the military, so is Ray. Don't they teach early on that you disobey or disregard? McGregor says you don't defy your superior. You just say, okay, and then you go on and don't comply with it when it orders you to kill somebody that is a non-combatant.
Well, let's just clarify that I was not in the military. I was in the CIA, and I did work with U.S. military special operations forces for almost a quarter of a century.
Okay.
And was involved with scripting exercises. So much
about guns. I always assumed you were in the military.
No. But I did learn how to shoot. Look, let's remember what happened to George H.W. Bush. In World War II, he's flying against Japanese. He's trying to kill Japanese. He takes offensive actions. He gets shot down, floats around in the water before he's recovered. If the Japanese had happened upon him and had killed him while he was floating in the water, that we would have said that's a war crime. So that's the standard. Once, if somebody's shooting at you, you can shoot back. But in the case of these boats, they're not even shooting back. And I think it was a point that was made on one of your conversations yesterday, either with Mearsheimer or I don't recall who else, but that the Coast Guard has reported to the Congress the number of interdictions it's done, and not a single one of those did they have to use lethal force. They stopped the boats. They detained the people. They inspected the boats. And in many cases, like I thought it was like 30%, maybe more, there were no they thought there were drugs on board. They had what they thought was good intelligence, but it turned out there weren't drugs on board. So they had to let the people go. In those cases where there were drugs on board, they arrested the individuals, took the drugs into possession. What Donald Trump is doing, though, the foundation for this was laid by George W. Bush when he got permission from DOJ to torture people. Now, that's illegal, but we got used to it. And anyway, they're terrorists. As long as we call them terrorists, we can kill them. And yet, unless somebody's got a gun pointed at you or threatening your life or to cause serious bodily harm, if you're a civilian, you would not be allowed to defend yourself just by thinking, well, I think that guy wants to hurt me. I think he's a bad guy, so I can shoot and kill him. So this is disgusting. But see, the problem is not just Trump, and the problem is not just Hegseth. The problem goes to the chain of command with Bradley and any other officer below him. that went along with this and said, well, they said it's okay, so we're not going to question it. This is when you're taking human life, you better absolutely be damn sure that you ask questions about it.
Do we know, and I'll ask this to either of you, how human life was taken? In other words, where was Bradley? I can't imagine he was on a ship. I mean, was he comfortably in DC making decisions? Was somebody in front of a computer screen pressing a button, dispatching a drone or a missile at the ship? How does that work?
Well, this is very interesting. Larry will know more particulars
Yeah.
about this, but be aware that Bradley was working with SEAL Team 6, part of SOCOM, Special Operations Command, not subservient to Southcom, the head of which quit about a month ago. Okay. So we have parallel structures here. One is completely disregardless of the law. It operates very closely with CIA. That's the chain of command that Bradley was working in, and now he is chief of, guess what? SOCOM. So you have what I think is a principled admiral. He's an African-American 3-star who quit.
Holsey, I think his name is Holsey.
Exactly. He quit about 3 months ago. No, about 6 weeks ago, Mike. So, when he retires, I think it's just another week or so, let's get him up before Congress and ask him, now, why did you do that when you've only been in place as Southcom commander for a year? And then he'll have to say, well, my daughter was in a pageant for Christmas, and I thought I'd like to do that and just take home leave for the you'd have to make something up. So, this is where it comes to a head. He quit, and he quit, I believe, on principle. And it's so nice to see not only an admiral, but a rare in the Navy, African-American admiral taking a stand for the rule of law.
Larry, how does the killing occur? How does the killing occur?
Well, yeah, actually, let me explain how, who was watching what. So SOCOM headquarters is up the road from me at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida. They have an operations center. And in this operations center, you got row upon row of desks. They're usually, inclined. So as you step up, it's like being in a small auditorium. And in the front, you got massive television screens. So Bradley would have been sitting in the commander's chair there and would have been on what's called a CIVETS, a secure video teleconference, with the commander of JSOC. So JSOC's based up in the Joint Special Operations Command, falls under SOCOM. Joint Special Operations Command deals directly with the Tier 1 units. And that commander there as well, who's, I think they're now a 2-star general, they'll be in communication with Bradley. They're talking, they can see each other on the screen. And there's a drone or some other platform, maybe an RC-135 aircraft flying overhead that's providing you visual. So they got real-time live feed. And I mean, I saw this, good Lord, 23 years ago. It was active then. So you got it real time, and they can see exactly what's going on, and it's recorded. And so, when they fired, I guess it's probably a Hellfire missile. Though you get an explosion, blows up the boat, and then they can you can see people still floating in the water, a la George H.W. Bush. And if the Japanese would have killed him, war crime. Let's just use the same standard.
Let me add here that I hope members of Congress are watching this program, because the security restrictions, the bigot list, the reality that SOCOM and Team 6, whatever, the Navy, they have a completely different, and you know probably more than I do about this, Larry, communications system. And guess what? Congress is not cleared for this. So Congress is not privy to the information that Larry Johnson just gave out. They ought to look into it, and they ought to ask the president, Is he cleared for these communications? And the answer was no, we haven't read him in yet. He's not on the bigot list. Well, read him in, and he should take formal responsibility for what Hegseth has done.
Here's Congressman Jim Himes, Himes, Democrat of Connecticut. I don't think this is an act at all. He was visibly shaken as he left this briefing room where Admiral Bradley attempted to defend himself and showed these movies. These videos, Larry, we don't know which ones he showed, but here's Congressman Himes. Chris, cut number 19.
Admiral Bradley has a storied career, and he has my respect, and he should have the respect of all of us. But what I saw in that room was one of the most troubling things I've seen in my time in public service. You have two individuals in clear distress, without any means of locomotion, with a destroyed vessel, who are killed by the United States.
Can you tell us a little bit more about exactly what was so troubling? What were some of the things that come up with it?
Under the DoD manual for abiding by the laws of armed conflict, the specific example given of an impermissible action is attacking a shipwreck. Any American who sees the video that I saw will see the United States military attacking shipwrecked sailors. Bad guys, but attacking shipwrecked sailors. Now, there's a whole set of contextual items that the Admiral explained. Yes, they were carrying drugs. They were not in the position to continue their mission in any way. People will someday see this video and they will see that that video shows, if you don't have the broader context, an attack on shipwrecked sailors.
Who ordered that?
The last thing I'm going to say is that the Admiral confirmed that there had not been a kill them all order, and that there was not an order to grant no quarter.
So does it exonerate Hegseth?
That's all I got.
Do you think the video should be released publicly?
I do.
Who knows if we'll ever see it, Larry?
Well, let me add that in addition, so Bradley's in his command chair at MacDill.
Bradley's not far from where you are now when he's making these decisions.
Yeah, 45 minutes up the road. The commander of JSOC right now, I'm not sure who that is, but they're sitting in Fort Bragg.
Bradley.
And then, Bradley's SOCOM.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then you've got the chairman, Dan Kane. I guarantee you, Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff was sitting on that CIVITS, that secure video teleconference, and Secretary of War Pete Hegseth was sitting on that. So they're all watching. We used when I worked with JSOC, it was called Kill TV, because there was constant drone footage up of, and then word would come down, hey, they're getting ready to hit a target, and so everybody would jump onto the high side computer, and there's a whole channel, several channels devoted to the different drone footages. So we've had this capability, good Lord, for 20 plus years. And so everybody knew. There's nobody sitting there that's uninformed. And so you got to go back. Listen, when these forces were deployed, they were given rules of engagement, ROEs, because the deployment order contains the ROE. And when they get an execute order, the order to execute the operation, that the ROE, rule of engagements, are reiterated. Now, I can say I never saw a single ROE in 23 years that said, if you think somebody's doing something bad, like moving drugs, you can kill them. Never. So we've crossed into territory, and they're using this BS excuse that, oh, they're narco terrorists. As long as we put the label on terrorism on them, we can do any damn thing we want. And it's wrong.
Here's what the Secretary of Defense thinks of rules of engagement. Chris, number 7.
We unleash overwhelming and punishing violence on the enemy. We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. Just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters. That's all I ever wanted as a platoon leader. And it's all my E6 squad leaders ever wanted, back to that E6 rule. We let our leaders fight their formations, and then we have their back. It's very simple, yet incredibly powerful.
Railing against the concept of rules of engagement since he was a platoon leader during his years at Fox, and now in these sad 11 months while he's been the Secretary of Defense. He calls himself the Secretary of War. Aren't rules of engagement the law of the land in the military, Larry?
Yes. I mean, it lays out what you can and cannot do. It's very simple. And, you know, I know some of the frustration that existed in Afghanistan, but the fact of the matter is, in Afghanistan, you know, we're actually fighting civilians. And in a lot of cases, when civilians come out of, they're surrounded by U.S. military personnel, they come out of their home with a gun. Well, hell, Americans would come out of their home with a gun if some foreign military showed up on our shores.
Right.
So
Ray, does it pay to make the moral argument here? I know you and I and Larry are repulsed morally by what happened, but does it pay to make that argument, or is the legal argument the stronger one?
Well, I incline to set aside the moral considerations, just consider the law in these instances. Now, I made a note about what Congressman Himes said. At the end, he said, now, wait a second, you know, you have to know the broader context. Well, that wonderful clip that Chris just showed is the broader context.
Right.
This is a Secretary of Defense who's in the chain of command saying rules of engagement don't matter. Now, another question is, and Larry will probably know more about this, but how about SOCOM? How about SEAM 6? How about this separate command that was set up to avoid the rules, to avoid anything that would mean they could be held accountable? Have they been told, look what rules of engagement for the regular command structures? That's one thing. We can do what the hell we want because CIA has authorized our thing, and the CIA can do whatever the president tells them to do. Is that what we've come to, Larry?
Well, actually, I'd say it's quite different for even the special operations units. They are governed by rules of engagement that are signed off on by the Secretary of Defense, or now Secretary of War, as well as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So even though they're in the world of special operations, there's still a chain of command and oversight. You don't get the same thing at CIA. CIA likes to pretend to be a military type organization, but within the Special Activities Division, they have a lot more, let's call it flexibility, where they can kill who they want, and there's not necessarily the kind of oversight that is actually there on the military side. And we saw a little bit, some of that with the death, if you remember back in the early days of the war in Afghanistan, Pat Tillman, a former football player for the Arizona Cardinals.
Right.
He was killed by friendly fire.
Right.
And General Stan McChrystal and Bill McRaven, they did a lot of, tap dancing and cover up to initially not point out the fact that someone was killed by friendly fire. And so, admittedly, when you get into the heat of war and you start using firearms and shooting, accidents can happen. But the real problem here is these people in boats, even though they're carrying illegal narcotics, or we think they're carrying illegal narcotics, we don't have absolute proof, or proof that would stand up in a court. And if they were in the streets of Baltimore or the streets of Philadelphia, police officers or drug enforcement agents would have to seize the narcotics and then be able to present it as evidence in court.
They certainly couldn't shoot the guys dead in the street. We know that.
Yeah.
Chris has put together a fascinating montage of Hegseth. It's 59 seconds. The first part is him in 2016 saying, well, we don't obey illegal orders. The second is him on Fox and Friends the day after all this happened, and you'll see how confident he is that he saw everything happen. The third is him sitting next to President Trump 2 days ago saying, well, I left the room. I'm not sure everything that happened because of the fog of war. Chris, number 16.
There are some guys at Leavenworth who made really bad choices on the battlefield. And I do think there have to be consequences for abject war crimes. If you're doing something that is just completely unlawful and ruthless, then there is a consequence for that. That's why the military said it won't follow unlawful orders from their commander-in-chief. There's a standard, there's an ethos, there's a belief that we are above what so many things that our enemies or others would do.
I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat. We knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented.
I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. I did not personally see survivors, but I stand, because the thing was on fire. It was exploded and fire and smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war.
Looked at Hegseth and said, it's the fog of fear. He's terrified of the truth.
Judge, let me make a point here that has relevance to today. It goes back to Pat Tillman, okay? He was a very high-profile fighter, having given up his pro football career. My God, he was a patriot, and he was killed by friendly fire. Now, was it an accident? I don't think so. Tillman was going wobbly on the war. We know that. We know that from some correspondence. So when Larry says McRaven and McChrystal covered it up in such a way that the Congress didn't have any gumption to really pursue it, he's talking about special operations people, Team 6 of the Navy, all the SEAL Team 6, if you will, all these people that are pretty much out of accountability area. And so this is really important, seems to me. If it was SOCOM and the CIA, you have ambiguity here as to who's in charge. The CIA is, you can do anything the president tells you to do. And so this is kind of an example of what happens. And when you get Congress that won't even look into Pat Tillman's cover up by McChrystal and McRaven, that's what we're in for now. And we need to hold our Congress people's feet to the fire.
I want to jump to President Putin before we go. This has been a fascinating conversation, but this statement that I'm going to play, that Chris is going to play of President Putin, was after the three of us were on each of your appearances on Monday. This statement was made on Tuesday. I don't know if you've seen it, but we haven't discussed it directly or as a group. Watch this. This is right before he spends 5 hours with Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. Chris, cut number 12.
We are not planning to go to war with Europe. I've said that 100 times already. But if Europe suddenly wants to go to war with us and starts it, we are ready right now. There can be no doubt about that. The only question is, in what way? If Europe suddenly starts a war with us, I think it will be over very quickly. This isn't Ukraine. With Ukraine, we're acting in a surgical, careful manner, right? So that, well, you get it, right?
Did you see his level of self-confidence? But aside from that and the looks on his face, what did he mean, Larry? It will be over very quickly if Europe attacks us.
Number one, they've been doing, let's say, mass production of the Oreshnik missile, a missile that has, let's call it, the destructive capability of a nuclear weapon without the radioactivity, but it can actually be used with great precision. Russia also has been building up its forces to, at the start of the special military operation in February of 2022, total ground forces are about 300,000. Now they're well over 1.5 million. So they've increased their ground forces by a factor of 5. And they've been building tanks and other missiles, the Iskander, the Kaliber. So they are, the general staff is planning for the worst case. The worst case is that NATO's not going to back off. NATO's going to attack Russia, and Russia will retaliate. And what Putin was pointing out is that part of the slowness within the Russian assault on the Ukrainian forces has been a deliberate policy to minimize civilian casualties and minimize the casualties on the Russian side. And it's worth noting, simply compare the total number of civilians that have been killed, both whether by Ukrainian or Russian side over the last 8 years. No, heavens, we're going back to 2014, 11 years. Compare that with the death toll of the Palestinians in Gaza over the last 2 years. The Israelis have killed more in Gaza in 2 years by a factor of 4 than have been killed civilians in a prolonged war in Ukraine.
Ray, do you think the Europeans are crazy enough to attack Russia?
I think they're crazy enough to try another false flag. I don't think it's going to work. They've been trying that for the last several weeks. What's really important here is that Putin is brandishing the stick, right? He's waving his stick, but then he gets into these conversations just an hour or two later with Witkoff and Kushner, and there comes the carrot. Now, 2 days after the interview that Chris just showed, he was interviewed by Indian journalists, and the Indian journalist says, well, tell us what happened. And he says, no, that would be indiscreet. I'm not going to do that. But I'll tell you, 5 hours is too long. I got really tired, but it was very useful because what we did, and this is a quote, we had to go through practically every point on this new proposal from the U.S., and that's why it took 5 hours. So it was a, quote, meaningful, highly specific, and substantive conversation, end quote. One other quote from this same interview. Again, it was Thursday, just yesterday. What about points of disagreement is the question. Well, yeah, there were points, but this is a complex task. I'm quoting Putin now. And it's a challenging mission for the president. He took upon himself, President Trump did, I say, because achieving consensus among conflicting parties is no easy task. But President Trump, truly, I believe, he sincerely tries to do this. Okay, now, we've been saying this for quite some time, at least I have, that Putin is really interested in working with Trump. Now he's saying, yeah, he's facing all kinds of conflicting, no consensus, just conflicting, and he's taking this on anyway. So my point is simply that, look, the discussions went really well. Yeah, there was this stick before them, but the carrot means a lot. And now people in the foreign ministry of Russia have been tasked with preparing, if possible, for the next summit, which hopefully will convene in Budapest or wherever within the next couple of months.
I wonder if at that summit, and I have to run, but Larry, quickly, if Sergei Lavrov and Marco Rubio would be there.
Well, if we will know that the formal negotiations are underway if Lavrov is there with Rubio, because that's what Putin said.
Correct.
Putin said it last week very clearly. So if Lavrov and Rubio shows up, then they've made a decision to actually proceed with formal negotiations. If they're not there, they're still trying to figure out how to negotiate.
Guys, thank you very much. Thank you for your time, as always, and thanks for your candor on these unpleasant subjects. Great conversation. Have a great weekend. We'll see you both at your usual times on Monday morning.
Roger that. Thanks, Judge.
Thank you. And Monday, of course, we will have Alistair Crook, Larry Johnson, Ray McGovern, and probably one or two others in the afternoon. And we may have a surprise for you next week. Not telling you who it is, but you'll be thrilled to observe me interview a former colleague of mine. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.